I'm Laila Ammar. Thank you guys for coming. I know most of you have sat through this already. Special thanks to Rob for his mentorship, and thank you, Mr. Cobb, for being here. My talk is Depth Conception. Buildings, like people, have attitudes, postures, expressions, and other lifelike traits. I see the development of a building not unlike that of a character in a narrative. The way a character responds to different situations is similar to how architecture reacts to site, program, ground and sky, any number of things, all which are telling of the character. In The Hunger Games, when Katniss Everdeen steps up at the reaping ceremony to take her little sister Prim's spot as the district tribute, the audience can start to understand her character. She is brave, protected, instinctive, but it wasn't that act that gave her these traits, but instead these traits that caused her to act the way she did. By developing a building's character, you can better anticipate how it should deal with solving those problems of site, program, ground, and sky, how it would react. And maybe sometimes its actions may surprise even the author. But before the character is alive, independent, and capable of reacting to situations, the author must develop, sculpt, and mold them. The term character development can be used to describe the individual's change and growth through the duration of the narrative, but it can also be used to describe the process a writer goes through to bring their characters to life, establishing their backstory, their mannerisms, their ambitions, their imperfections, their insecurities, essentially what makes them tick. In Colin Rowe's essay, Character and Composition, or Some Vicissitudes of Architectural Vocabulary in the 19th Century, he cites the earliest English appearance of those terms, being from Robert Morris, who in 1734 asserted that architectural character is divided into three classes: the grave, the jovial, and the charming. The grave and jovial remind me of Sebastian Serlio's tragic and comic settings, where the difference in character translates to a physical difference of architecture. I'm certain the taxonomy of character has expanded over the centuries, but Morris's three groups can still help us envision what effects architecture would project upon spectators. The reverence a cathedral commands, the liveliness from a community marketplace, the prestige of a courthouse. And while 21st century buildings may still compensate for symbolic content and subjective empirical value, I believe buildings can exceed those values by activating their character traits to become characters themselves. I've been working on creating a cast of jovial architectural characters of my own. Their development has called question to the conventional modes of design. Architecture has always relied on the mode of drawing. The transformation of flat representation has provided direction for critical thought. But as we move further into a digital culture, every line we draw exists in three-dimensional space with no physical boundaries. I don't anticipate diverging from the inevitable movement towards digital design. In fact, such digital environment relieves us from the repercussions of indulgent, excessive designs and allows us to revel in beefy, plump, heavyset architecture that I quite admire. However, I hope to be critical of it by also holding on to many attributes the flatness of drawing gave us. The writer or architect is always pursuing a certain character. Through the blending of the ultra 3D and 2D, the fusing of fat and flat, I have devised a system of formal operations that result in distinctive and lively figures. And though I recognize character can come from many ambitions, form, material, experience, affect, I am working to create a recipe of varying amounts of different ambitions that produce a specific character type. My interest in fat and flat is not dissimilar from Tim Burton's obsession with unsettling outcasts. I am working on a particular process that helps me create my quirky characters. Let us first take a look at the fat, the ultra three-dimensional. Since nearly everything is three-dimensional, it is the ultra that moves the geometries as far from flatness as possible, that makes it interesting and legible once recombined. 3D at a blasé condition is dissonant with 2D, and their individual contributions to the character would be left ambiguous. The ultra, which makes something fat, removes 3D from 2D enough that when combined are then harmonious. Fatness can give a certain legibility. Like bold fonts, bold architectural elements command a presence. forcing the viewer's attention. This bolding has been done many ways through architecture's history. If we look back at the classical Greek orders, there is an established system of proportions. Moving from Doric to Ionic to Corinthian, you could use many descriptive scales: sturdy to dainty, masculine to feminine, primitive to intricate, but perhaps even fat to thin. The fat, sturdy Doric column was great for exaggerated boldness. The Temple of Poseidon, the Parthenon, the Temple of Hephaestus, and so many more. And then we fast forward to the 1800s, when we see its fatness exploited further by over-exaggeration on the Curtis Lee Mansion. These columns are massive. Why so fat? These bold columns give the mansion its omnipotent power even from miles away. It refuses to fade into the trees. Bolding may be as simple as growing in size, but to exceed that criteria, inflating brings another set of character traits with it. This action always creates a doubly curved surface. Such curvature allows constant visual depth. The infinite amount of surface normals allows a constant three-dimensional perception no matter what view is elevated. The opposite is true of any angular, faceted geometry, which has a quantifiable amount of surface normals, allowing at least one face at any time to be diminished to flatness. So is a sphere fat? It certainly is the epitome of double curvature. If we look back at Etienne Louis Boulet's cenotaph to Sir Isaac Newton, or Claude Ledoux' spherical house, we get the constantly perceived depth, which, as I said, is desirable for that ultra condition. The way that spheres handle light is a beautiful surface quality. However, their perfection, their ideality, renders them incapable of being fat. An inflating sphere transforms in all three dimensions equally. If we have a row of spheres, we could never describe one as fatter, but only larger or smaller. The moment one does become fatter or thinner, it loses its ideality and is no longer a sphere. Thus, a criteria of fatness would be no ideal shapes can be fat. So, though Boulet's cenotaph to Newton and Ledoux's spherical house are vast, excessive volumes, they just cannot be fat. However, if we could imagine the stairs of the spherical house staying put while the sphere continued to grow and the puckering they would cause, or if Boulet's cenotaph inflated while its base stayed put and held on to the same circumference, the top spewing out like a muffin top over tight jeans. Curiously, if we take a cube and inflate it, it quickly loses its ideal shape. The seams provide a framework for distortion. Inflation also creates a unique tension in objects. Being in this state of tension breathes life into the still. Inflating puts the skin in motion, and when you capture something in a state of fatness, it's like capturing just one moment along that line of motion. Take Jeff Koons' well-known balloon animals. They defy their material qualities by capturing inflatable traits in their metal bodies. What I find most interesting about these pieces is the precision of surface agitation shown. It begs the question of how inflated are these bodies? How much more air can they capture before bursting? The twists separate one big balloon into discrete pieces that qualify themselves as inflatable through the tension at the intersections. Koons explores how surface intersections of inflatables can vary. His sculpture Hulk represents an inflatable plastic Hulk. Again, clearly defined material qualities, as it is actually made of painted bronze. The impeccable way he recreates how seams would react on a plastic doll are incredibly accurate. The balloon animals and the Hulk show two different seam conditions made possible by inflation. Fat inflatable objects, such as Koons's, also raise questions and push boundaries of plasticity, which has been a recurring contemporary project since modernism. In her article, Plasticity at Work, Sylvia Lavin points out what we gain from plastic architecture, despite its lack of material specificity. Plasticity suggests an architectural behavior that works toward an ecology of recumbent productivity. Its efficacy derives first from the fact that not only does plastic lack traditional material ethics, but also from the fact that plasticity is an unsettling diagram of the negotiation between concept and materiality. Second, plasticity both constitutes and exceeds the modern. Its fluid agility embodying an aim that modernity's obsession with structural and formal regulation repressed. Today, most significantly, plastic's double status. as a desire to be made and molded, as well as a desire to signify, is producing a multivalent sensibility in which the clarity of view at the core of the Enlightenment project gives way to the density of experience. Meaningful without signification, progressive but not avant-garde, formed but without objection, architectural but without hierarchy, plasticity is at the core of the contemporary architectural project. Anish Kapoor, another artist who often operates in this mode of plasticity, also calls to question seams of inflatable objects. However, instead of representing what inflating causes the seams to do, he acts as a seamstress, carefully patterning the seams to get predetermined forms with the least agitation of surface. Leviathan, his 2011 installation, creates almost perfect sphere, mirroring the interior volumes of the Grand Palais. But they aren't perfect. They are seamed together with gooey arms reaching from one to another, as if they are cellular bodies stuck in the middle of mitosis. And their imperfection is embedded into the skin. It is the fact that this is how it was constructed, inflated from a puddle on the ground to becoming incredibly space invading. Is it an object in the room? Is it a room? Turns out most fabulously, it's both. Similarly, in Kapoor's collaboration with architect Arata Isozaki, the Arc Nova is another inflatable space that operates in many ways that Leviathan does. The precise seaming, vastness of the interior, the erection of a puddle, but I would qualify this as fatter. Its plump character is defined by the way it puckers. By tethering that point down to the ground, the volume's transformations can only translate in certain directions. I would conclude then that it is often the connections and seams that articulate a body's fatness. Architecture can attain inflated form with actual inflation, like Diller's Scofidio and Renfro's design for the Hirshhorn, or Brigati's bubble building. But because plasticity is not materially specific, it can also attain the same traits without actually being inflated, like Herzog and Nemoiran's Water Cube and their Allianz Arena, or Diller's Scofidio and Renfro's new D-Tower design. Since seams play a huge role in articulating fatness, I turn to aggregating as another formal operation of fattening. Aggregating reveals a system of seams while also producing varying effects and ways of considering organization and hierarchy. Two of my most recent projects, an airport terminal for JetBlue attached to Saarinen's TWA, designed with partner Natalie Snyder, and a concept tower for the annual Evolo skyscraper competition, both derived from fatty aggregated masses. Starting with sculpted, stretched, squished ellipsoids, the unioning of them creates definitive seams that control the perception of possible inflation or deflation thereof. Aggregations also set up part-to-whole relationships of a field object. As Stan Allen writes in his article, From Object to Field, field conditions move from the one toward the many, from individuals to collectives, from objects to fields. And while the objects that make up the field can solve problems locally, the field they create, which is also an object, operates at a value greater than the sum of its parts. This allows for considerations of circulation and program to help compose the aggregation. This wayfinding diagram was developed simultaneous to our positioning of each boulder for our terminal massing. We considered its overall composition while also pursuing programmatic adjacencies and the necessary logistics, composing the parts and the whole at once. Such object-oriented philosophy is explored by many contemporary philosophers studying speculative realism. Graham Harman, as part of that movement, has set up extensive arguments to consider our environment as a series of discrete objects. This starkly contrasts other contemporary arguments found in movements such as parametricism, championed by Zaha Hadid's partner, Patrick Schumacher. Schumacher calls for continuous field conditions, smoothing individual objects out of the equation. I don't believe this solves the issue, as discrete objects will still exist, and this is just avoiding dealing with them at the local scale they demand to be dealt with. In 2008, Greg Lynn came out with a line of toy furniture that exploits the value of field objects. If we look at his dog storage wall, each toy dog is basically one brick in the repeating pattern. However, each of these dogs once existed as an individual toy and retains those trademarks. And even once cut and altered to be a brick in the wall, it doesn't have the capacity to act as a shelf until arranged with the other toy brick units. This construction relies equally on the capacity of the individual toy and the collective composition. You can also see this strategy with Stan Allen's design for Maribor or Mark Foster Gage's Quayshawn Cox Center. But this idea isn't just a contemporary one. The reading room in Henri Lebroux's Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève is essentially two discrete volumes seamed together to create one vast space. Or, if we jump back to Kapoor's Leviathan again, we see his massing mimicking that of the Grand Palais, which points out it is actually four discrete volumes seamed into one. So, in addition to the interesting network of seams aggregations give us to work with, constructing field objects also reveal interesting relationships at various scales simultaneously. This helps me better understand how to control the compositions of my fatty objects. Now that we've uncovered some of the traits bestowed by fattening through the use of bolding, inflating, and aggregating, let us consider what we gain from flattening. Though the mode of drawing may be in decline, the meanings they conjure are still productive. Let's jump back to the earliest form of drawing known to man, cave paintings. We can likely trace the advent of the section back to an Indian cave painting from 5000 BC, two men under a tent. Not only does this raise questions of tectonics and basic shelter, the prehistoric primitive hut, if you will, but it is curiously drawn in section. This view, looking into the space through a building slice, gives us a way to understand relationships, usually from space to space, or in this case, the relationship of exterior to interior, and how the bodies interact with that. Then, from Vitruvius and beyond, the section becomes just another architectural convention, a standard, the baseline to illustrate the inner workings of complicated systems. Non-specifically, it is deployed in product manuals, MRIs, even NASA mission diagrams. The section gives us what we can't otherwise perceive by showing all pieces concurrently. This isn't dissimilar to a plan cut, but the section privileges the more common viewpoint of someone on the ground. The vertical cut puts the viewer in relation to the spaces they see, rather than floating above. The section creates a stage set with multiple scenes playing out at once. Take Le Corbusier's section for the Crochet House, for example. He scribbles in people standing at the kitchen counter and walking up the ramps, plans engulfing spaces, and the car parked underneath. It isn't just about the building, but the simultaneous uses of the disparate spaces. The section is the Bye Bye Birdie stage set revealed. Eventually, the theatrical sets these section drawings depict step into the real, with works like Paul Rudolph's Milan residence, where he literally uses a section view of the house as its elevation. It is this precise use of actual section that I find productive as a 2D application into the 3D world, slicing to reveal and retain the theatricality the building section has always given us. Going back to my terminal and tower projects, you can see the slice in each project, revealing how the discrete objects all coalesce. In the terminal, the section slice translates to a plan cut because the privileged viewpoint actually is of someone descending onto the site from an airplane above. However, for the tower, the section is cut, figure outlined, and the tracing retained, as the overall figure continues to distort. Another lesson I commonly borrow from drawings is the ease to explore surreal and fantastical situations. Though many drawings are technical recreations of reality, like the constructed perspectives we learned from Brunelleschi, drawing is also a tool to easily manipulate and distort reality. Piranesi's prison series opens the door to drawing the impossible, defying structure and space. Depicting the impossible proves much harder in three-dimensional space, both virtual and real. But if you can imagine something as just an image, a drawing, you aren't tied to resolving it immediately. You are liberated to draw the impossible as Escher would. Along with fantastical freedom, I am intrigued by the playfulness drawings can give design. When you combine imagined fantasies with a cartoonish graphic sensibility, you get amazing worlds like those of Archigram's Plug-in City. This depiction of a hypothetical city suggests modular residential units that plug in to a central infrastructural megamachine. Their diagrammatic, cartoon-like illustrations show what they call a city is actually a constantly evolving megastructure, all movable by giant cranes. I believe such imagination can grow from the liberating practice of cartooning. In Yakov Chernikov's Architectural Fantasies, 101 Compositions, he wrote, "Architectural fantasy stimulates the architect's activity. It arouses creative thought. not only for the creator, but it also educates and arouses those who come in contact with him. It produces new directions, new quests, and opens new horizons. Architectural fantasy in all cases propels the culture of architectural problems, and with the freshness of new thought, with the switching to new phases of architectural creativity, it serves as the best aid in real design work. But his drawings question more than creative limits. They push figural readings. An intense graphic style that is almost simplified to color blocking offers an illustrative legibility. Such graphic clarity can be found in the earlier de Stijl art movement with its reduction of complex realities to primary forms and colors. This movement existed on canvas for Piet Mondrian, but was extrapolated into reality by Gerrit Rietveld in his design for the Schroeder House. Pop art, still relevant today, also uses the simplicity of a graphic style. Being about the popular consumer culture, it is represented with easily consumed images, like those of pop art king Andy Warhol and his iconic images of Coca-Cola or Campbell's soup engraved into our cultural memory forever. This cartoonish sensibility can be great as both a design tool and a way to express intent. We see that in the works of Rem Koolhaas in Delirious New York, John Haydock in almost everything he did, and more recently, Jimenez Lai's cartoon architecture and Florencia Pita's playful creations. At the beginning of my design process for my Holo skyscraper, I started with flat graphic ideas of what this tower could be. These cartoon diagrams let me explore my fantastical desires, possibly defying gravity and uncertain of how it would resolve three-dimensionally. It's probably clear which cartoon I continued to explore further. It was this first drawing that led me to continue shaping certain character traits, bubbly and proud with its body stretching up toward the sky. Lastly, I want to look at how drawings can transform a surface. When applied as cosmetic to surface, graphics have the power to change the entire reading. It is the transformative qualities where I find its value, rather than the status of the graphic as a standalone figure. Though a graffitied or tattooed surface may still be a crime to Adolf Loos, I believe its transformative effects on the surface separate it from ornamentation. In his article, The Cunning of Cosmetics, Jeffrey Kitness writes, "The cosmetic is not just another member of the family of decorative architectural appurtenances, collectively known as ornamentation. The field of effects of the cosmetic is quite different from those of its relatives. Ornaments attach as discrete entities to the body like jewelry. Cosmetics are indiscrete, with no relation to the body other than to take it for granted. Cosmetics are erotic camouflage. They relate always and only to skin, to particular regions of skin. They transubstantiate skin into image, desirous or disgusting. Though cosmetics may be constructed as independent graphics, the moment they marry the surface, they are no longer concerned with their own identity, but instead the illusion on the surface. In contrast, ornaments, like beautiful gems, retain individual value regardless of their application. Cosmetics are also not a contemporary phenomenon. The second style of Roman wall paintings, also known as the illusionistic style, painted columns, windows, landscapes, or architectural sets onto the walls, usually with forced perspectives. These wall paintings were not adding decorative ornament, but instead transforming the surfaces into illusions. Hundreds of years later, we see similar illusionistic desires in Mannerist paintings. Questions of space, depth, proportions, all posed on the surface of a canvas. Italian painter Tintoretto uses visual tricks that incessantly push the viewer's eye far beyond the depths of the canvas. In his painting, St. Mark's Body, brought to Venice, all the action is happening in the foreground. But it would all be easy to miss as the white line and bright building to the left pull your eye to the background, completely off center, but still demanding the most attention. Then Mannerist paintings transform the surfaces of interior space, with frescoes like the Chamber of Giants at the Palazzo del Te. This encompassing scene distorts the scale of the room and turns a shallow vault into a cavernous dome. Such illusions can amplify surface effects already present from a given massing, or it can undermine those effects, depending on what the graphic is and how it is projected to the surface. Visual artist Johnny Lemoussier shows how he can amplify the sharp edges of his origami pyramids with projected light. He also shows how he can dissipate those edges into a visual field. His accuracy and control give the bas-relief varying character, ranging from pure and articulative to elusive and ambiguous. New animation techniques also deploy graphic projection. In Disney's animated short Paperman, the characters' qualities are amplified and more clearly articulated by projecting 2D line drawings onto the virtual surfaces of 3D characters. This differs from a simple overlay because the lines are actually projected onto the surfaces. They move with the virtual bodies. The lines distort the surfaces, producing a more visually developed character than either could produce independently. Tom Wiscombe's discourse on tattoos also explored surface articulation through infused graphics. His idea of tattooing is in direct opposition to subdividing surfaces with mesh or potentially infinite patterns. Panelizing has been exhausted and is always in conformity to the body it resides. So, Wiscombe turns to tattoos, which have clear figural boundaries that take the body for granted, as Kipnis asserted cosmetics do. Wiscombe's Le Monaco house shows not only his application of tattoo, but how it transforms the surface of the original massing. It outlines apertures and carves construction scenes into the shell. These divisions are controlled with a painterly eye, rather than a systematic subdivision of surface. So, again, looking back at my Evolo skyscraper, we can see the formal dichotomy of the plump back and super flat front. To better relate the two, I extracted the resulting languages of both sides to create a figure that I would then project onto the entire skin. To emulate the bubbly side, I used the lines of the curved seams and married them with the caustic figures that result from the flat slice. What is conceived as figural graphic is then dripped over the body, following every nook and cranny. This transforms the character into a more sleek and alluring body. It also creates a framework for glazing the curved shells in specific areas. My particular pursuit of character shapes the persona of a building at the urban scale. It has character and it is a character. It is concerned with the vanity of its image, but ultimately, it is the totalizing overall view that is consumed over and over again. The camera pans when a sports game goes to commercial, the cheeky tourism billboards. Cities are identified by their skyline, and their skyline is shaped by the figures of buildings. But with a clear formal language established, the interior experiences could also be transformed with the same palette. This being the interior of my Evolo skyscraper, and here, a section model looking at the interior of our terminal project. But undeniably, this argument does commiserate with the interests of iconography. Like Bjork Ingels Group's web catalog of projects, I could easily boil these designs down to graphic icons. But I hope this process exceeds the icon, with its ambition to contribute to ideas of bricolage, question ideas of computation, and learn from ideas of other artistic disciplines. Character development is greater than or equal to fat plus flat, which means there are many other possible solutions for the right side of that equation. To determine that would be to ask, what story are you telling? No matter what it is you put into the right side, the real test is, will it produce a responsive character? To me, spaces and buildings have desires, and if their creators infuse a clear character, those desires will surface. Buildings are alive for me the same way materials were for Louis Kahn. You say to brick, what do you want, brick? Brick says to you, I like an arch. If you say to brick, arches are expensive, and I can use a concrete lintel over an opening. What do you think of that, brick? Brick says, I like an arch. But for Kahn, the stubborn bricks already knew what they wanted, and he was just there to help them fulfill their role. When presented a blank slate, it is an opportunity to sculpt the building's desires before having to ask, what do you want, building? And eventually, you won't be the one asking, because architects have short relationships with their buildings before waving goodbye and handing their future over to the owner. Laymen are the keepers of architecture, but hopefully, with a legible character, even they will hear what the building whispers. Depth conception, the formulation of a character's depth. Thank you.